Understanding All Exceptionalities by Kristen Groffel. Learning disabilities. There is no such thing as a typical student with learning disabilities. In elementary school, these students with learning disabilities often struggle with phonetic analysis, word identification, and reading fluency. And this also shows up with these students also have dyslexia. Some students' mathematical difficulties can range from mild to severe, and many students with learning disabilities have difficulty with short-term, long-term, and working memory. A challenge for students with learning disabilities is that their emotional needs can be overlooked in the pursuit of addressing their academic needs. So it's reported that there are more symptoms associated with depression, higher levels of anxiety as they're older, and adolescents, more emotional difficulties. Examples of negative effect, loneliness, acting out behavior, and lower levels of hope. So we as students, as teachers, can reduce the number of math problems for these students and giving students the option to opt out of taking weekly spelling tests. For the week, we can provide visual or graphic organizers to accompany oral presentations. We can incorporate models of demonstration or role play with these students using gestural, visual, or verbal to emphasize key points. Using scaffolding key concepts that students must learn is important, and involving students implementing every pupil response techniques. Communication disorders. A speech or language impairment is a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, language impairment, or voice impairment that adversely affects a child's education performance. These students have difficulty in recognizing social cues, initiating conversation, or expressing emotions. So it's important as teachers that we assist students in varied format for relaying the information, such as using both audio and text formats, visual representation with verbal information, graphics, graphic organizers, and controlled vocabulary. We may need to support in building social relationships because they're at risk for difficulties with social communication. Social interactions are important, and they increase classroom participation and build social relationships. To better understand their knowledge, instead of them citing only written report, also allow PowerPoint presentations, demonstrations with visual supports, taped oral reports, or dramatic performances. Emotional behavioral disorders. There's 5 characteristics, namely inability to learn, inability to build or maintain satisfactory relationships, inappropriate behavior and happiness or depression, and physical symptoms of fears. These students may exhibit characteristics of anxiety disorder, mood disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and or schizophrenia. They may exhibit externalizing, aggressive, acting out, non-compliant behaviors, and initializing, withdrawn depression, anxious, obsessive, compulsive behaviors. So it's important as we as teachers to keep class rules simple and clear. We need to reward positive behaviors and allow mini breaks. We need to try to celebrate successes of these students more than reprimand or punish their mistakes, and we need to avoid disruptive or off-task behaviors and take extra steps to motivate these students. Offer them incentives for academic success, large or small. Celebrate their hard work and praise their good efforts consistently. This can go a long way in giving these students the motivation to excel in your classroom. ADHD disorders. These students with ADHD, compared with other students, have lower academic achievement and lower grade point averages and higher retention rates. Students tend to have lower vocabulary development and working memory challenges that result in problems with reading achievements. Children with ADHD commonly have difficulty regulating positive happiness, exuberance, and negative anger, recognition, regulation emotions. In addition, students with ADHD tend to have impairment, pragmatic language. This refers to the use of communication in social contexts, such as engaging in conversation, using appropriate gestures, and making narrative comments. These impairments are highly related to the impairments in social skills. So it's important with these students that you work on these social skills with them, and by doing that, you try to keep them more calmed down in the classroom, maybe taking some of the excitement away, like moving by the placement of these students away from distractions. They learn best with carefully structured academic lessons. It's important that you set learning and behavioral expectations for these students, and it's important to simplify instructions and choices to help them succeed. Intellectual disabilities. Two major characteristics of intellectual disability are limitations in intellectual functioning, including memory, generalization, and motivation, and limitations in adaptive behavior, including conceptual, social, and practical skills. Students with intellectual disabilities may have difficulty in knowing appropriate behaviors to use in a given situation. They may have difficulty remembering information that they have just received, as well as previously learned material. So we need to teach specific social rules and skills, such as turn taking and social distance. We need to repeat instructions and check understanding often, and use various means of presentation for these students, like visual, physical. We use guidance, peer modeling, and it is very, very important not to overstimulate these students. Autism. Children and adolescents with high-functioning autism experience more challenges in understanding daily social situations that include irony, metaphors, conflicting emotions, jealousy, social blunders, and intentions. They have repetitive speech, such as repeating of words and phrases, motor movement, such as finger flicking, hand flapping. They have excessive reliance on routines, and they have a highly circumscribed and fixated interest on things such as door locks, lights, bus schedules, or particular movies. They usually have excessive or limited reaction to sensory input, excessive touching and smelling of objects, fascination with spinning objects such as lights, and response to environmental sounds. So as teachers, we need to use multisensory delivery with these students, like dramatic presentation, using comics, PowerPoint presentations, overheads, movies, and online resources involving both auditory and visual processing for these students. We need to repeat instructions, allowing 10 seconds for processing time. We need to speak slowly and clearly, modifying tone and pace. We need to use educational software designed for struggling learners or children with ASD, and we need to have more of a structured small group instruction, including typical peers review of learning objectives, often involving games, role-playing, and discussions. Example would be peer meditation role-playing. Traumatic brain injury. The cognitive impact of brain injury often results in problems associated with memory and executive functions of planning, problem solving, and abstract reasoning. Children with moderate and severe TBI have an increased risk of problems in building close relationships, solving social problems, and recognizing emotions. As teachers, we need to keep instructions as brief and uncomplicated as possible for these students, repeating exactly without paraphrasing. Present lecture information in a visual format, and use more than one way to demonstrate and explain information. We need to allow time for clarification of directions and essential information. Break tasks into smaller steps and demonstrate each step. Use verbal phrase and encouragement frequently with these students. Hearing loss. Identifying students with hearing loss or children are typically classified as deaf or hard hearing. Their achievement levels, especially in the areas of reading and writing, are primary concerns for students with hearing loss. They often are followers, but rarely lead, and they are easily frustrated if needs are not met. They often have a degree of language delay, and they have some difficulties with social, emotional, and interpersonal skills. So with these students, you need to speak clearly and use multimedia approaches for visual presentation of course content, such as overhead projectors or PowerPoint presentations that are preferable over blackboards, because as teachers, we do not need to turn our back to these students. This is especially important for students who are relying on speech and who are relying as speech reading, signing, cueing, or use of residual hearing or receptive communication. We need to partner with parents and make families aware of limited opportunities in the home for exploring and discussing math context during daily routines, and make sure that the parents are able to communicate effectively in the child's chosen mode of learning, and be sure that there's someone or students to interact in the learning environment who can effectively provide not only the vocabulary to label objects, but also a language model for expressing concepts and ideas using the child's mode of communication as well. Visual impairments. Students with visual impairments are surprisingly heterogeneous. They differ from each other in how they learn and in their visual functioning, psychoeconomic status, cultural background, age of onset of visual impairment, presence of other disabilities and cognitive abilities. Some are gifted and some have special talent, and a large number also have multiple disabilities. Students with visual impairments also experience different social interactions because they cannot share common experience with sighted friends. They have limitations on the ability to get around, so the knowledge about and control over their environment often are areas of concern for individuals with visual impairment. So we as teachers need to determine what works best for our students with visual impairments and how to help them to learn, whether that be Braille, print, dual media, auditory strategy, objective symbols, or a combination of some of those things. And we want to create a literacy-rich environment in which the child knows that others are reading and writing. Gifted and talented. Identifying students who are gifted and talented characteristics of students who are gifted include high generated intellect, creativity, leadership ability, and visual or performing artistry. Gifted and talented also takes that in twice. Exceptional gifted, which means that this student is not only gifted in something, but they also have the challenges of learning disabilities, such as math or reading. There's something in there that they are not as strong in. So many students are gifted, show positive social and emotional adjustment. And giftedness originates from an interaction of environmental and biological factors. So we as teachers with these students who are gifted benefit, know that they benefit with differentiated instruction. However, sometimes teachers don't believe they have the time to or the expertise to implement this differential curriculum. So it's best that we use curriculum compacting, which is streaming what is taught to the students by first assessing their prior knowledge and then modifying or eliminating work that has been partially or fully mastered. We need to use flexible grouping, grouping students according to strength, need, or interest, and groups change frequently, sometimes in the course of a single class session. And tiered assignments, the entire class studies the same content, but the individual students choose assignments at different levels of complexity with the teacher's assistant, and using multi-level learning stations provide meaningful independent work that extends and enriches the class discussion. Thank you for letting me share my exceptionalities with you, and I hope you learned something.